where we are driving the engagement. We are making sure that people understand why we're doing it. We're trying to create desire, right? We want them to desire to make this change as opposed to kind of shove and force them into that change. We're focused on knowledge and ability, right? Do they have the knowledge? Can they do the change or what the new process is going to look like?
Yeah, and actually, again, it's execution, right? So this is where in a PM space, we have the plan and we're working our plan, right? But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not forsaking the execution of the plan for the people, right? So we are always making sure that our people are coming along that journey with us, and have those key people elements involved.
Good. In the monitoring and controlling phase, as you would expect, this is where change management folks should be conducting check-ins. We should be measuring adoption and executing upon a support plan, right? Maybe a go live support plan type of function.
Yeah, in a project space, right, we've probably already established earlier on, hopefully, what those success criteria and metrics are that we're trying to achieve. And we're just making sure our project is staying on track, right? And sometimes we have to make those adjustments, right? If things are, going well, we're indexing on that. But where we see things that might be tripped up along the way, we're making those adjustments as well.
And finally, in the close phase, right? In the closure phase, we are focusing in the change management space on reinforcing behaviors, right? Trying to eliminate negative behaviors and really positively reinforcing the good behaviors. And that will allow us to sustain that change throughout the life, through the remainder, right? After the project is dissolved and moved away.
Yeah, and then we're closing it out on the PM side, right? We're saying that's a wrap, yay. And we have a couple of different ways we do that. It might be an after action review. It could be a closeout meeting. It could be lessons learned. But I think the key is not only are we closing out the project, but we're making sure that we've learned from our successes and any bumps along the road that we faced along the way, right? And so that helps build into making sure that, yeah, we've closed it out, but we're continuing to sustain the lessons learned and making sure that we can carry those on to additional projects and different changes that may come up. So you've gotten to this point and you're probably saying, wow, Diya, Brian, that's great. We've seen all this. Thanks for the PMBOK review. We're in our PDU today, right? But really, what we're saying is, how are we different? And where does that change come in? So how is PCPM different? So as we talked about earlier, it's really about, we want to make sure that we bring in people on the front end, right? We have to make sure we made sure our change management was integrated in those process management groups. But how do we bring specifically a heavier focus on people? And that's where we have the difference. So you see on the front end of those phases, those process management groups we talked about, there's a discovery phase and their alignment phase. And we really said, as we sat back and thought about this solution, that's how we bring people in as early as possible. We're bringing in a focus on people even before we even get their work officially started. So if we think about discovery phase, the discovery phase for us is all about learning as much about the project as we can, right? We build that early understanding of the project. We identify who our leaders are, who our stakeholders are, who the project sponsors are, who are the people impacted by the change. And then we also take a focus to understand how familiar is this organization with change, right? That's probably something that's a little bit different. Not sure if, how many people have the opportunity to really sit back and look at that, right? But we do take the time to say, let's just dig in to see, okay, how have we done projects like this before in the past? Have we done projects like this before in the past? How much change do we have going on in the organization, right? So that's really where we build the foundation at 71 to say, in this discovery phase, let's just figure out as much as we can about people and the impact, not only of this project, but other work that might be going on. And then in the alignment phase, it's truly about aligning the leaders, right? So we go through all that work, we figure out what change management approach would be needed. And it's very key for us to make sure that the leadership is engaged and they've signed on, right? Because without making sure that, first of all, that our sponsors and stakeholders, they're aligned on the project goals, but that we have their commitment to make sure that the change management and approach and plans that we built, that they're committed to the success and they're committed in there, right? Because for us, a key part of making sure that people are engaged and we build the awareness and the adoption is to just make sure it's coming through our leadership as well. So they have to kind of practice it and lead. So we really do take time in this phase to build that agreement and that commitment. And then that just helps us make sure we have a consistent and unified approach in leading and helping people through the change. So if we look at it, we bring in discovery, we brought in alignment, and that gives you a visual of our overall framework from end to end. Those process management groups that we started with the integration of change management, but also bringing discovery and alignment on the front end. It gives us that early focus on people so we could build our approach with people in mind, making sure that we build their awareness, we keep them engaged, and we drive adoption throughout the project. So it's really great to see this all combined and together. You see the visuals of what we focused on. So let's talk really about how do we move this from a theory and a framework to practice. And so we're going to talk about a tool that we use that does kind of pull this together. We use it in the discovery phase, and we call it our PCPM risk diagnostic.
So, Diya, real quick, this one thing I want to jump in on this particular slide right here is the thing that I want folks to connect here that I think is super important, right? Is that the change management plan, right? That's in that initiate phase. The difference that we come in with is this is no longer just a best practices or some standard blank template of a change management plan, right? All these new inputs, actually, when we get into the initiate phase, these new inputs from the sponsors and the stakeholders and the change management approach, the alignment, all that stuff is now means we walk into the initiate phase with a robust, well-developed, and customized plan for the project, right? So the people already have a kind of a leg up on that technical solution, and we can work with them as we move through this project. Because oftentimes, in my experience at least, change management, it's always the people are lagging the technical solution of a project. So with these new inputs, we're walking into the change management plan, and we have a robust, well-developed, customized plan. So I hope that resonates, and if it doesn't, we're going to do some Q&A at the end, and let's come back to that. So,
hey, Brian, can I add one thing to that too?
Oh, please. Yeah.
You just triggered another thought for me too, and I think it's based on the experience I've had. Right, that even sometimes you could get into an initiate phase with a project, you have your approval and you're ready to get started. And I don't know if anyone has had the experience where there's spin of, oh, what are we doing again? How are we doing this? What's the scope? And it's this constant spin. And it sometimes can happen because we maybe haven't identified who all the right stakeholders are. Maybe we haven't identified who all the groups are that are impacted, right? And so I think part of, as we looked at 71 at building this solution, that's kind of some of the heartache that I know I have. I've had in different projects where I wanted to make sure that that was built into and that this was built in as part of the early phase within discovery.
Good. Okay, as Diya mentioned, let's dive into a tool, right? So you understand this framework, and now we need to say, okay, but so what, Brian? So what, Diya? Let's go a little bit more deeper, right? I'm sure all of you have a risk diagnostic tool, either at the company you work for, or you've used them. I know I've probably used a dozen across my career, right? I have my favorite questions and all that kind of stuff. What I want to show you is we're going to show you kind of our risk diagnostic, but not at a detailed level, right? We're just going to give you kind of some samples to get you thinking about how it's different, right? This is just one tool in our arsenal of tools that we use across the spectrum called, our PCPM our work, right? So we got a lot of different tools in the toolbox. This is just one little example right here, right? So in our risk diagnostic, we kind of break it down into 4 areas: understanding, foundational, execution, and then that monitor piece, right? So as we look at the understanding, and you can read these questions here, these examples, right? What we're really trying to understand at this point is what are those key project elements, like scope, budget, timeline, that kind of stuff, right? And as you look, you'll see that we have these 3 questions here. That first one really is, I got to move something out of my window so I can see everything here. There we go. It really is just, that's your typical project management type of question, right? Probably on every risk diagnostic any PM has ever used, right? If you look at the second question, who is impacted by this project and how are they impacted? That is a very typical change management conversation, right? Or question. What's different, and these are the types of questions that we bring into this PCPM space, is what is the history and the track record of project failure in the past, right? And it's answering the question, but I want you to pause and really think about that question, because the results of that question, actually what we're learning from the results of that question is what bias are people walking into that project with? What baggage are they coming in with, right? Hey, I've been on this project, we've tried this 4 times and it's never worked, right? Well, our strategy and approach to that type of a response is going to be dramatically different to, hey, I'm a brand new person and I don't have any, baggage or anything like that coming in, right? So these are these examples of this. Our risk diagnostic, I think, we have kind of a long version and a short version, like a lot of these different tools will have, right? What's the very detailed and in-depth, and all these tools are very project dependent as well, right? So what we rely on is our consultants' experience to know which questions to ask. So we're not formulaic. It is very much about, the human intervention, the change management, the consultant coming in, looking at this situation, collecting all this information, understanding which questions to ask, focusing on these ones that are these hybrid, right? Between the change management and the project management space, to really get a good understanding, to understand where the people are at and where we need to move them towards, right? So moving on to the foundational, another example, right? You can see that first question is really about, is the leadership team accountable? Typical project management. The third one, very typical project management. Do we have business requirements? Do we understand, that kind of piece of it, really? That middle question, though, is let's talk about that project team. And more importantly, do they have the right skills, experience, and capacity to ensure project success? I'm sure if I ask the question, how many people have been on a project, that you get loaded to 120%, or you have team members who cannot respond to a request because they have to do their day jobs, right? Or you get, hey, this person is available and they have some capacity, so we're going to put them on your project even though they don't have the right skills, right? Now, it's not to say we don't take that person and utilize them, because we typically do, right? You gather the resources you need and you use that. But it's to understand the risk that is associated with that, right? And having that people lens, not only from a project success standpoint, but how do you think that person feels when they're asked to do something that they may not feel super comfortable doing or know how to do, right? So some things to consider there, right? As you look in the execution phase, we focus very typically people, process, technology. That's really what it is around the execution stuff. And again, there's more questions that dive deeper into these levels, but these are just some samples for you. So the monitoring and control, again, you have your typical change management, right? What are the gating criteria from a readiness standpoint? For the project management, is how do you resolve that project risk? The risk piece, right? Do you have a method? Are you tracking it? Are you managing it, right? What have you done in the past? That kind of stuff. And again, that hybrid question, though, comes down to how do you assess readiness in terms of people, process, and technology? And are you tracking that, right? Have you done that in the past? If you haven't, well, that's something that we need to make sure that we emphasize as we move forward. All right. I think, Diya, we're going to go to the wrap up right now.
We're going to go to wrap up. All right. So, I was trying to think through how to wrap this up, and I came up with a quote from Dale Carnegie, right? So anytime you do a presentation where they say you tell them what you're going to say, you say it, and then you tell them what you said. So there you go. We're at the closeout, wrap up. So really, the key thing that we want to leave with you is when it comes to your project, people are at the core of your solution, right? And that's really kind of, you've heard that probably as the theme interwoven through this throughout this presentation, right? Is that that people are at the core, right? And the people being at the core is the key to the success of the project as well, right? So for us in this our PCPM solution, we want to make sure we're bringing people in the project across the line together. We start with that discovery and alignment phase. That's probably the key takeaway there when you're thinking about our framework, right? Because really initiate through close looks very similar to what we've seen in process management groups, right? But that's kind of what we're bringing to the table that's different and unique. And then the tools that we use are similar, but they have this emphasis on people. And you've just seen that through our risk diagnostic and how we've approached that. And so really, as we think about PCPM, we have a client quote here. And just to give some context behind the quote, This is actually a client that I worked with in the financial services space. And this was a client that was working on the implementation of a policy administration system. And they bought in 71 early on, right? So they bought us in, actually before the project started, they actually bought us in at the point where they were still had RFPs going to determine which system and system integrator that they were going to go with. So that's prime spot for us to be in that, like we really went through the discovery and alignment exercise with them. So we worked with them early on just to make sure we understood the scope of the project. We wanted to understand the groups that would be involved and also the level of impact of the change for them, right? That's another key thing that we want to make sure we focus on so that we can make sure, depending on the level of impact, that really helps drive our change management plan and activities for various groups and teams. So that gave us an early read on the change. And it also helped them as they thought about how do we build in those elements as we're thinking through our RFP and looking at different system vendors and integrators. So then once the project was finally selected, it officially got started, right? We moved into that initiate phase. And then we also were able to keep our relationship going with that client, right? And they engaged us to actually see us through initiate all the way through to close. And so you could see based on the quote from our client, he talks about the engagement, obviously, but also talked about the fact that there was better usage in adoption and ultimately saving time and cost savings, right? And that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, right? Of just the impact of when there is no change management involved. And think of the greater impact of having all this work happen even earlier and upfront in the process before you dig into the project. So I think that is just a key understanding and just clear results of the work and how we've made the solution succeed with one of our clients. Okay, so with that, we're gonna open it up for any Q&A, any questions?
So you guys have two, if this is the voice from in the outer regions, Jen talking here. Yeah, you guys could ask questions in chat in your control panel, or I do believe you should be able to unmute yourself, or we can help you unmute so you can ask the question. So I see there's one already. Oh, no, that one's just about PDU stuff. Oh, here we go. Brian, all right, Brian. Brian Russell, do you see this one? It says, what is the biggest challenge to overcome when putting PCPM in place?
I will say, I could talk from this, Brian, and then you can add in. I would say the biggest challenge for putting PCPM in place, it particularly comes, I think, when we have clients that are probably newer in the change management space, right? And they are really early exposure, kind of very, haven't had that much experience with understanding or being able to put or work with change management as part of their solutions, right? I think a lot of times we've run into clients that even when we say change management, they think training and they think communications, right? And it's so much more beyond that, right? It's around adoption. It's around building awareness. It's around engagement and making sure that you're keeping employees engaged throughout. So I think that is typically, when I've seen trying to put PCPM in place, it's the people get the project side. It's just really trying to bring them along the journey and build their change capabilities.
Yeah, Diya, I'll echo exactly what Brian said in the next line in his chat. Was just he finds that leaders do not want to take the time, and I absolutely agree. I think again, I think back to my career, right? That's where my experience comes from, and the leaders who are advocates for change management have had bad experiences and they've had very good experiences. So the biggest challenge for us typically is we need to create that really good experience, and then they become advocates moving forward, right? Because oftentimes it's people have just had bad experience after bad experience, and bad is a relative term, right? Don't get me wrong, right? But when change management, when we're brought in early, when we do the PCPM methodology, right? They see the goodness and they see the value, and that's really what it comes down to. Because when a leader doesn't want to take the time, it's because they don't see the value, and that's what we have to create. We have to create those that space for them to see that, and we have to execute upon that. So Kim has another question here, and I'll read it from that perspective. So I feel like we frequently don't address change management until the end, after development and ready to roll out. Do you see this as a common challenge? Kim, I think you're speaking from experience. And yes, that is a very common challenge, right? And it's unfortunate, but that is, again, why we do that discovery and alignment phase, is to make sure that people, again, kind of what I was saying about the previous response, was making sure people see the value of doing the change early, right? And getting the people side of this thing lined up and get really good alignment so that we can execute seamlessly, because it is so hard to pull people along as opposed to just doing lockstep with them, right? If we do lockstep with them, we're going to be much more successful. So you're absolutely right. It happens often. It is the technical solution is in place, and then everybody says, "Oh, okay, well, we better train people, or we better tell people about it." It's like, yeah, we should have told them about it quite some time ago.
Right. Or it's the flip side, right? Or why is no one using this? Why? If there's, especially if you have parallel systems at the same time, well, why is no one using the new system? Why haven't they switched over, right? So it can also lead to adoption issues as well, right? And yeah, that's kind of the harder situation to be in when, it's kind of not working. It's like, oh, let's bring in change management now and kind of fix it. So yeah, we've seen those challenges as well.
Okay, Diya, Kenneth has a question. Do you want to answer that one?
Okay.
And I know everybody can't see the question, so Diya, let's make sure that we
you read them out. Yeah.
Yeah, read them out, and then we'll respond.
Okay. Yep. All right. How do you keep people at the level of commitment throughout the project? For example, during the project, a person is signed up with another project and is now stretched to 120%. Absolutely. One of the things that, first of all, what we do up front, and it's one of the things that we look at in our diagnostic during the discovery phase, is we want a really good understanding of what else is going on in the organization at the same time, right? And if in a sense of change fatigue too. So if we have a lot that's going on in the organization at the same time, a lot of different initiatives, we want to call that out up front. And we would actually call that out as a risk to, the leaders, to say, hey, at the same time that you're doing this one big project, there's all this other work going on throughout, right? And what we do is we build specific change plans and activities to just make sure that we are, first of all, we're keeping the level of commitment and engagement, right? Because to me, it's an engagement issue as well. But we also want to acknowledge and understand what are all the different pieces of work going on and where are people's time and energy committed and diverted, right? And especially if you're going to have people that signed up for a project. Sometimes, I've worked in projects where we try to see if there's a way to negotiate, right? Are there some of these additional changes or other things that are happening in the organization at the same time that can somehow be delayed, or can we move the timelines, right? And if then that can't happen, is then how do we just keep people engaged and motivated throughout? And we make sure that we build a lot of that into our change management plans and activities, right? Because again, we've all seen that in organizations, right? We're rarely just doing one thing. We're working on multiple projects and then our day jobs. So we really do want to be appreciative of that, and we build that into our change management plans and activities.
Yeah, Diya, if I can real quick too, I think, resource planning, if you think back to the risk diagnostic, one of the sample questions I talked about was experience and capacity, right? And what I love about this particular one, Kenneth, is the fact that it's, hey, when we do the resource plan at the beginning of the project, everything is fine, right? Nobody's over max. But then, 2 months into the project, all of a sudden something else comes up and now they're loaded to 120%, right? And if we do that discovery and alignment phase early, people will understand that we need to balance that, right? We need to be able to identify that deeper into the project and say, hey, wait a minute, all of a sudden Diya is loaded at 120%. That might be an issue, right? And if we've done that discovery and alignment correctly, and the change management folks are talking to the project management folks, there's an easy way to have that conversation to say, hey, let's look at this. How big of a risk does it create in our project? Is it something that we need to act on, or is it something we need to monitor? Okay. I love this next one. George has a question here. Do you have any special tools or approaches when changes being implemented negatively impact the people involved? And George, I hate to give you the answer first, but I'm going to qualify it, right? The first question is it depends, and it depends on how they're being negatively impacted, right? And I know that's not a great answer, but here's the one thing I've learned over my 20 plus years now is be honest and be transparent and tell them as absolutely as soon as you possibly can, right? I can't give you any better advice than that right there. So, Dee, anything you want to maybe chime in on that one as well?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there, Brian. See very similar things, yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, and I'm moving through the chats here. So you to go through the chat window. I think Vicky asked, how about success celebrations along the way? Yes and yes, Vicky. We definitely want to make sure we do that. I think that is so key. And sometimes when we do project work, those are the things that can get missed, right? Because we're so focused on let's, execute the plan. That's why having those, we definitely make sure we build those celebrations in as part of the change management plan and activities. So we absolutely do that along the way. And I've seen, teams do it different ways and, have different approaches to that. Now with our environment of work from home for a lot of organizations, it's caused us to even think a little bit differently or creatively about how we do that. I've seen people do kind of virtual celebrations, virtual giveaways, that type thing. But yeah, we definitely make sure we build all those success celebrations in along the way.
All right, next one, Cynthia has, she says, her experience since returning to Boise a few years ago is that companies are very small and are very unfamiliar with change management. They think it will cost a lot of money or that they can just assign an existing resource to do change management. Love the quotes, by the way, Cynthia, thank you. How do you convince a small company with leaders who possibly have never been exposed to change management or aren't aware of the benefits that it is, in fact, a necessity that will improve the project environment, outcome, and sustainability? Cynthia, first off, that fabulous question. Thank you so much for articulating the way you did. And you're right. And it goes back to that very first question, right? We have to sit down and we have to help those leaders understand the value, right, of what we're coming to the table with, right? That we need to bring the people along. If you think back to the metrics, the slide I had some of those numbers, right? 1 in 4 technology projects fail if you don't do change management, right? 7% of projects are going to fall behind or will not meet objectives if you don't do change management. And really what it comes down to is understanding those leaders, right? And understanding are they an emotional leader, right? Do you appeal to them from an emotional standpoint? Are they data driven, right? So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can approach that. But the bottom line is, if you don't approach it, they're never going to change. You have to start elevating that conversation and bringing it up to them. The other thing that I hope you may have picked up on, right? With this PCPM approach, you don't need a change manager and a project manager, right? That's not necessarily what we're saying. In large projects, you do because you need more resources, right? No doubt about it. Diya and I both have a lot of project management experience. We didn't start in change management. Like my background is process improvement, right? To project management, to change management, right? So you can weave this skill set in together with a single resource, right? So. Okay.
I think the next question is from Gerard. Working on multiple projects concurrently implies ongoing context switches. So how do you minimize these expensive and demotivating context switches? So I'm assuming what Gerard is getting at there is you're doing multiple things at the same time, and I'm assuming by context switches, we're talking goals, objectives, and alignment to strategy. I think so. I don't know if Gerard wants to add any context to that. Okay, I'll take a stab at it.
That until we get a response.
So that's why really, so Gerard, as we talk about within the discovery phase, that's one of the things that we want to know, right? And it's time we have key questions in our risk diagnostic based around that, right? So that we really understand what else is going on in the organization at the same time. And then to make sure too that there's that alignment to corporate goals and objectives, right? To kind of get to the why are we doing something, right? So definitely for the work that we're doing with our clients, that we make sure that that's very clear. But also, the other thing to keep in mind, we look at, we talked a lot about our project management side. We also do is from a portfolio perspective, right? And I've done a lot of engagement with clients where I'm not just looking at probably the one project that I've been linked to or assigned to, one project I'm assigned to, I'm looking at the entire portfolio. So I'm trying to get a sense of everything that's going on, particularly if there's a lot of change impacting one group. There's a lot of change that's pulling in the same project resources. They sometimes need that direction on how and where do I spend my time, right? And my energy, how do you help? So a lot of times we do spend time with clients just helping them prioritize their own portfolio of work. And then hopefully that minimizes the demotivating constant spin of everything's changing, and definitely gives us the opportunity to call that out, right? So if we constantly see shifts going on within the portfolio, I've worked with clients where I've been like, okay, well, let's go back. Let's take you back to the prioritization. And it was doing that with, and I've had clients where I've done that with them on a constant basis to say, okay, let's go back and make sure, if we're changing, let's kind of understand if the change is necessary, why it's changing, and really give people the understanding of what's changing and why.
Thanks.
Gerard, I'll maybe chime in there too real quick. I have learned through the School of Hard Knocks to do a, for lack of a better term, I call it a project collision analysis. And I will go through and talk to people about what are the projects are you working on? Like, and sometimes we go down to when the go live dates are, right? Because hey, I might be good right now, but I got a project and your project are lining up to go live the same week, and I'm gonna be, I can't work 48 hours in one day type of situation, right? So I use a project collision analysis. I don't have a great template for it. I just know that I do that, and it's one of the things I kind of have on my list that I need to do. I know we're getting close to time. I do want to absolutely include something that James has put in here, right? He says,
please do. That's funny.
I sell change management this way. Like the picture on your dentist's office says, do I have to floss all my teeth? No, only the ones you want to keep. Do I have to do change management and project management? No, only on the projects you want to succeed. So James, thank you for that. I can't think of a better way to wrap it up, because that's
great.
I had to mute my laughter, so at least you get a little feedback. Oh, James, good job.
Thanks, James. That's awesome.
Thank you. That's funny.
Oh.
All right. I think I'll speak real quick, Diya. I just want to say thanks everyone so much for your time. Thank you for the interaction. Absolutely love the chats, some of the questions that were asked. Really appreciate giving us the time. I know you're going to get this presentation. Our emails are below. If you have any questions, want to just pick our brain on anything else, don't hesitate. Shoot us an email. For the Micron folks, you can find me on Micron just as easily as well. We'd be happy to chat more, anything along those lines. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This was great. It was fun. And as Brian said, if any questions come up, please feel free to reach out. I have my 71 and change email today, and hopefully in the next few days, I'll have a Micron one as well too. So thank you.
One of the takeaways, we also have a little widget, a little video that you're going to get a copy of the presentation from the group and stuff, but there's also a little link in there. It's about a 90-second clip that kind of explains this, maybe at a higher level as well. So if you need a refresher, something like that, it's a little electronic takeaway you can have when this email comes out. Okay, Cheryl, I think, or Jen, we're turning it back over to you guys.
You are getting a lot of kudos, you guys. Thank you for your presentation, good information, great presentation. Thank you for the relevant, interesting info. Brilliant, you both did well, thank you. And I did early on, I know someone who said, love this at the beginning, so thank you, bravo, thank you. This is really great, and I have to say, you have to pat yourselves, both of you, on your back here, because there were 52 people at was the high number. People have already dropped off, but I think that's a record.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool. It's a good turnout. So thank you so much. And I'm just gonna drop the mic. Like, I'm out. I'll see. I'm gonna leave on this great note. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time. to join us for what PMI WIC provides, which is a lot of really great opportunities to learn more about project management. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And Cheryl, do you want to stay on? And Brian, do you want to stay on? Brian Russell, sorry.
Sure, I can stay on.
Brian's to pass around here.
Hey, thank you all.
Thanks, Diya.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now.